This party's getting crazy. Let's rock.
Devil May Cry 3 made a genre. The original Devil May Cry set the framework, but it was ultimately Devil May Cry 3 that set it in stone. Whether you choose to call them spectacle fighters, character action, or my personal favorite, crazy games, they all share the DNA of DMC3. Games like Bayonetta, God Hand, Nier Automata, and basically every other game developed by either Clover or Platinum Games are defined by the high skill cap, high APM, high style brand of gameplay that it created. But even now, over a full decade after its release, despite the genre branching out and growing with multiple spiritual successors and a direct sequel of its own, Devil May Cry 3 still stands effortlessly among the top of its genre, in no small part due to the fact that there's still a number of things it does better than any of its peers. So with that in mind, let's polish up on our jump cancels, shoot a cue ball into a demon's face, and see what we can learn from Devil May Cry 3. Let's start off by talking about these goobers. If there's an element of Devil May Cry 3 that has yet to be surpassed by any game in its genre, it would have to be its flawless enemy design. This is a game that, despite having a staggering 21 basic enemies, manages to have every single one of them feel like a unique and distinct creature, with their own abilities, personality, and look. To see what I mean, let's look at 3 of the most common enemies that at first seem very similar. Pride, Lust, and Sloth. All 3 of these guys look very much like generic demons. They're bipedal, attack using scythes, and have a tattered appearance to them while also kind of feeling like living statues. At first these seem like enemies that could feel interchangeable or easily blend in together, especially in the heat of the moment. But due to subtle differences in both their mechanical and artistic design, this essentially never happens. They have strong silhouettes that all differentiate themselves from each other. Where Pride has all of these soft, rounded corners in its design, Lust's appearance is dominated by all these jagged, hard edges, while Sloth carries this slender yet dominating frame that towers over all the other demons you'll commonly be encountering. These silhouettes are further driven home by giving them all a single, unique, dominant color in their design, making it even easier to differentiate them on the fly. This also lends to granting them their own sense of personality. Each of these enemies has their own unique style of movement that makes them feel completely different from their peers. Pride moves slowly and cautiously, giving it a sense of something that's weak and cowardly, as cannon fodder probably should. Lust is always frantically jumping back and forth, looking for a chance to leap in from a distance and get a quick hit in. This gives it a sense of eager aggression, but the fact that its attack is easily interruptible with a stinger or basically any other move makes that aggression feel like foolhardiness rather than actual skill. They're as arrogant as they are brain dead. Finally, you have the Sloths, who don't even really move at all. When they do walk, they do so at an incredibly slow pace, probably the slowest movement speed in the game. However, they make up for this by simply teleporting to you before dropping a sluggish, hefty swing. All of this comes together to make them feel like their namesake, and distinctly separates them in terms of attitude and mechanics from the rank and file. And I could do a similar kind of breakdown for nearly every enemy in the game, from the animalistic, self-replicating blood goyles to the falsely divine, wall-clipping fallen. And this is without even talking about how each of their styles of attack and reactions to being attacked encourage different approaches, how they all feel thematically connected, or even counting the amazing bosses. Let's compare this to a game that I love but kind of fails on this front. Devil May Cry 4. Here your basic cannon fodder enemies are the Scarecrows. Specifically the Arm Scarecrows, the Leg Scarecrows, and the Mega Scarecrows. The Arm Scarecrows and Leg Scarecrows are ostensibly different enemies with different movesets. The Arm Scarecrow relies on a 2-hit combo, while the Leg Scarecrow will use a 1-hit swipe and occasionally jump in the air for a drop-down attack. However, despite this sizable difference in mechanics, they look nearly identical with nearly the same silhouettes and coloring, and are essentially impossible to separate in the heat of the moment. Even worse, they share what little personality either of them have. This becomes even worse once you add in the Mega Scarecrows, who tend to waddle around in almost the exact manner as the regular Scarecrows. Their movesets are different, but they feel like the same character, and it makes the Mega Scarecrows feel less interesting and intimidating as a result. Compare this to the Abyss enemies from DMC3, who are essentially the Mega version of Lust and Sloth. It carries over a lot of the same attributes as those enemies, but is granted its own body language, style of movement, and silhouette, making it feel like a fresh and exciting new enemy instead of a slightly stronger version of an already existent one. The Scarecrows aren't bad enemies, but the flaws in how they're handled make them forgettable and generic, while fighting against DMC3's combatants feels much more engaging because they feel real, like they have a unique personality, as shallow as it may be, instead of just dropping a monster into a sandbox for you to beat up on. And that makes all the difference when it comes to moment-to-moment gameplay. But the enemy design alone isn't all DMC3 has to make its combat so uniquely satisfying. There's one tiny element that frequently gets overlooked. An element kind of left out of every single one of Platinum's games that contributes immensely to the satisfaction of the combat in not only DMC3, but 4 and even DMC. It's this, the style meter. Now, what I'm about to say might sound like hyperbole, but I believe every word of it. The style meter is without a doubt the smartest and most underrated idea to come out of Devil May Cry as a franchise, and should have found its way into nearly every beat-em-up years ago. It is so fantastic that I will personally say that, in my opinion, it's as big of a reason Devil May Cry took off as a series as the combos or this guy. And there's no reason we shouldn't be seeing more of it. And yes, I know the amazing Bayonetta and Wonderful 101 technically have this mechanic, but we'll get to that in a second. That being said, it is a nearly free way to drastically improve your combat system, because it brilliantly prevents players from settling into a dominant strategy while giving them encouragement to explore all the tools available to them. Like it or not, when most people play games, they will always, consciously or otherwise, seek out the most efficient way to play that grants the biggest reward for the least amount of effort. Take note that I didn't use the word fun there. I didn't spend 4 hours farming ultimate spells in Final Fantasy VIII as a kid because it was the most enjoyable way to spend my time. I did it because I knew it was the most efficient way to gain an advantage in the game for the least amount of effort. In some instances, this is okay, as the most efficient way to play is also the most fun. For instance, not falling into pits in Mario isn't efficient, so people don't do it. At least, not on purpose. However, for a game like Devil May Cry 3, this won't work, because playing efficiently isn't the goal. Playing stylishly is. This is where the style meter comes in. If you only do the same action over and over again, the game quite literally judges you for it and gives you a smaller reward than it would give you if you experimented. This encourages you to attempt something more creative to bring that style rating up, which means it's encouraging you to go through the move list and figure out what moves you have while constantly rewarding you for trying those moves out, which means you're constantly improving because you're constantly trying to build up that style meter faster and keep it full for longer. And before you know it, you're doing stuff like this. It makes you play in the most fun way humanly possible by constantly rewarding you for playing in that way. And I can hear some of you tapping your foot, waiting for me to talk about Bayonetta and Wonderful 101, and yes, they do have similar systems to this, and they are built around the same idea. But as good as those systems are in a lot of ways, they fall apart due to one simple fact. They simply aren't as easy to read. And no, I'm not talking about the actual text here. I'll put it this way. I want you to look at this combo meter right here and tell me how well they're doing. Now tell me, how well do you think this person is doing? I could show that DMC combo meter to literally anybody and they would instantly get it and be able to piece together what it values. But less so with the Bayonetta one. I know this because I've played through Bayonetta about 10 times and I'm still fuzzy on what constitutes good for this a lot of the time. I know Wicked Weaves and Angel Weapons increase the multiplier, but I'm still not sure what counts as a good multiplier. Obviously 9.9 is good, but what about like 4.6? And how close is that to giving me enough points for a platinum rank? I have no idea. Meanwhile, I know exactly how good an A rank combo is and how close I am to getting an S rank combo due to the little bar beneath it that tracks how effectively you're comboing. That little bar is the reason why I attribute the success of this combo meter to DMC3 instead of DMC1. Because with 3's introduction of that bar, you begin to get immediate feedback as to how you're playing and the effectiveness of your move choice. With DMC1, there was always a lingering sense of uncertainty as to whether or not you were playing as well as you could be until you saw the entire rank go up or down. And this kind of uncertainty still exists in Platinum's ranking system. And that uncertainty means you stick with what you know works, which is probably why I find myself doing the punch-kick-punch combo far more than literally anything else. This certainty of standing that DMC3 gives the player means they are always able to remain immersed in the moment without concern as to how well they're actually doing while encouraging them to try new things, all simply by changing one text-based graphical element. Now there's still one last element that this game has to call all its own, something that every other game in the genre has tried to emulate and failed at. An element that may be the biggest reason for both the game's long-standing quality and continuous love from fans. Virgil. You see, if there's one thing these kinds of games love more than anything on a narrative level, it's rivals. From Jean and the Lumen Sage in Bayonetta 1 and 2, to Prince Vorkin in Wonderful 101, to, well, Dante in Devil May Cry 4. These kinds of relationships are almost mandatory in this genre. But as great as some of them are, none of them can touch Virgil, in no small part because the entire game is centered around him and the 3 fights you have with him. This isn't an exaggeration. If you look at the 3 Virgil fights, they perfectly line up with the 3 climaxes needed in a 3-act structure, and every major plot point takes place during those fights. Factor in the shared goal and the philosophical and ideological differences between the two, and you have a rivalry that overshadows everything else in the story in terms of importance. The game itself even calls attention to this when it brings Virgil back at the tail end of the game after he vanished to make room for the new big bad.
What? You don't possibly believe that he deserves to be our main event now, do you?
Now that you mention it, you're right.
This is something that literally every other game in the genre has tripped up on. It always makes the rival a subordinate of the big bad, or some mysterious third party, or your uncle. But DMC3 is the only game in the genre that was dedicated enough to make its rival the first and final antagonist. And this benefits the game immeasurably because it means that from beginning to end, it has a single driving motivation. No distractions, no confusion, one goal. There's never a moment where you question what's going on or what you're supposed to be doing because you know that Virgil's still out there, waiting for you. And that gives purpose to every action you take, both in the narrative and in your efforts to improve your skills as a player. Admittedly, you could get the same kind of effect with any kind of well-crafted narrative. However, given the foundations and general themes of the genre, a story like this is a near-perfect fit for it, as evidenced by the genre's continued attempts at it. And frankly, I wouldn't want that to change. Hell, I don't even want the genre to change. But I do want it to improve, and at times the only way to move forward is to look back. There is a treasure trove of knowledge on how to craft action games to be gleaned from examining Devil May Cry 3. Despite its bombastic veneer, DMC3 is a game defined by brilliant subtlety in its design. It shows how minor touches as simple as giving enemies their own colors, recontextualizing what the combat asks of you, or keeping the antagonist the same throughout can make all the difference in the experience you have. And that, more than anything, is why so long after its release we still have so much we can learn from it, and why Devil May Cry 3 can still undoubtedly stand confidently among the best of the genre it created.